Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about, well, having a good story. So let's get started. If you like what you hear today, please leave a like, tell your friends, send me a message. Tonight is all about, how to have a good story about yourself, or more accurately, what in your life would make a good story and why. But first, I want to mention some news I just learned about just before this broadcast. Charlie Munger, who is the other half of Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, the big investment firm, passed away today. Today is November 28th, at the age of 99 years old. I just saw an interview with him very recently, like within the past week or so. I was just amazed about how at that age he's still so active and and so dedicated and a lot of good things to say about him. But he had a lot of many great quotes, and like we discussed last week, he's another example of how money is just kind of an amplifier, and it just makes a person more of what they are. It doesn't really change them necessarily, because he donated hundreds of millions of dollars over his lifetime, and often at a single time. So he probably donated billions of dollars actually. And and one of his favorite architecture requirements, he was kind of an amateur architect. Whenever he did a building, like at one of the universities, I forget the name off the top of my head, but at the university, he was involved, and they said that he would give the donation if they accepted his architecture requirements. And one of his requirements was that the women's bathrooms always had to be much larger than the men's bathrooms, so there wouldn't be a bigger line at the women's room than the men's room. And he just he was a good, you look at some people and you say they got rich and what they do with the money, or they just kept it all for themselves. He really did spread it around. And Berkshire Hathaway over the years really turned into a very interesting investment firm, because unlike so many of these quote modern activist investors, it's a special place in my heart for these um, modern ones. They go in and they invest in a company and they basically try and take out all the value and they just leave a shambles behind. They pat themselves on the back about how much money they took out and helped the shareholders. They destroyed the company, but they helped the shareholders. When Berkshire Hathaway invests in a company, it's really to make the company better. And I'm not saying that everything they did was perfect, but really their point is to help the company grow and become more solid and provide more jobs, and to just really build up the the whole community around, really. Not to tear the company down and walk away from a shambles, but to leave a really well operating, well managed, well run company. It's a totally different way of doing it. So I really miss him. But I wanted to read a quick quote from him, putting on my reading glasses here. And this is from an interview in 2019 on CNBC. And he's asked, what's the secret to a long and happy life? Munger said the answer is, and I quote, is easy because it's so simple. You don't have a lot of envy. You don't have a lot of resentment. You don't overspend your income. You stay cheerful in spite of your troubles. You deal with reliable people and you do what you're supposed to do. All these things, all these simple rules work so well to make your life better. And they're so trite. And staying cheerful because it's a wise thing to do. Is that so hard? And you can be cheerful when can you be cheerful when you're absolutely mired in deep hatred and resentment? Of course you can't. So why would you take it on? And so, end quote. That's the sort of person he was. He really emphasized the positive. He, didn't just accumulate wealth for the heck of accumulating wealth. He gave it all away. Really, somebody who's going to be missed is one of the old timers who really set a higher standard, and that's kind of too bad. So, but back to the topic at hand, talking about writing a story about yourself or writing a story for others in presenting what's in your life. So the Wall Street Journal seems to be having more articles on baby boomers and Gen Xers and such, which I find pretty interesting into itself. But equally interesting to me, and not necessarily in a good way, is the focus on many of these articles. Excuse me for 1 second. We got something going on here in my throat. And there's the mute button. There, we'll see if that works any better now. I just got back from traveling this past weekend, so I hope I didn't meet any new germs that are trying to take residence. But so like I said, a lot of these articles seem to focus on how to present how to make your life kind of more than it is, with the implied thing there that what your life isn't really quite good enough. A lot seem to focus on the end of your career, where you make it through retirement comfortably, and simply, what will you do? So now here on 7 Every Minute, we're never at a loss for what we can do, right? We always have a lot of things in the pipeline. Similarly, we're never short on ideas on how to come up with even more ideas on what to do. So I always find it interesting when people have trouble coming up with ideas. So this particular article, entitled How to Avoid Being Boring at 60, is the name of the article, in the review section on the weekend, was just a must read for me. So I just, a title like that. And I could start by saying that the author, Rob Lazebnik, Lazebnik, might benefit either from following me or perhaps getting a different group of friends. And why would I say that? And first of all, I really want to say I'm not trying to pick on Mr. Lazebnik. I'm sure he, it was written partly tongue-in-cheek, and he has his own way of living, and it's different than mine, and that's fine, and that's his right. Absolutely, his I'm not to criticize him in any way, and I'm not. But the gist of the story is that if you aren't doing something different and exciting, well then, you really don't have much to talk about. And my response to that was, wow. That's kind of like, again, I'm not trying to line Mr. Zemnick in any way, seriously. But I see that sort of attitude about one's own life quite regularly. That my regular old life is, well, uninteresting, boring. And I guess a lot of it has to do with how you perceive yourself and how you choose who you hang around with, quite frankly. Who's your circle of friends? I live a pretty normal life, in my opinion, but I do try to be pretty mindful of what is going on around me and also the people around me. Also, at any moment, there's usually a lot of both good and bad, so it's up to me as to which I want to focus on, and which will form the basis of any stories I wish to relate to my friends. And we talk about this all the time. Case in point, the 5.5-hour trip home from Virginia, where I may have gotten my cold, took nearly 8 hours. So, almost 3 hours longer than it normally does. And I elected to emphasize how many people got to see their families. There were no major accidents, instead of complaining about the length of the trip. Also, it meant I got almost 7 uninterrupted hours to practice my Spanish listening skills. Win-win. I could have I could have complained about the delays, the roads, the other drivers, how I'm never doing this again, but honestly, complaining really is pretty boring. I also stopped at a Spanish Mass in Baltimore as I drove by, which I actually had figured into the trip plan, and met a bunch of nice people, got to practice Spanish conversation, talked to the choir lead about how I sing in Spanish choir, and generally had a really nice break in my trip. And remembered once I got there, realized, I'd been there about 2 hours ago, or 2 years ago. But, frankly, I personally feel that by emphasizing the good parts of a normal trip, I ended up with a fun and, dare I say, somewhat interesting story or stories to tell people. And as a bonus, I also feel much better about my day and myself. No need to ask. One of his examples was, ask Southwest Airlines to let him make the prepare for landing announcement so he'd have something to talk about. Kind of like, okay, but a lot of times when I sit in the plane, if the person next to me is interested in talking, I'll chat with them. And I usually get a lot of good stories out of that. I've met some actually fascinating, and when I very first was starting this, sitting next to a woman, and we got to talking about that I was going to Podcast Movement, and that I had a podcast, and I was all excited about it, and she asked what the topic was, and I told her what the topic was, and she asked if I had any ideas. I said I have all these ideas, and it turns out she's a major producer for her podcast. And just by chatting with somebody, came across her, got a lot of information. It was really interesting. So you don't have to do really weird and exciting things to not be boring. You just have to pay attention to life and live it to the fullest. And I think that's the real point of, in the story's author, I think, gets hung up with this modern thought that the only thing that's interesting is the stuff that's unusual. But really, I see in our lives, the most interesting and not boring things is the reality of life itself and all the other interesting people that you meet. I've generally picked friends who share many of my points of view on important topics. Politics, for example, is essentially irrelevant, right? If we agree, whatever. If we don't agree, whatever. That's not important. There are truly important things based upon our principles, and my friends and I have those in common. So when I describe walking into a crowded religious service in another language in a rough town, they know it isn't some adventure trip. It's me meeting people in a meaningful way and relating to them the kindness that was shown to me while I was there. They found it interesting. I was interested in telling it. They find it not boring because I presented it as something that was a pleasant event and that was naturally interesting. Not because it was meant to impress a stranger with how unboring it was. But this goes way beyond one story in a major newspaper. It's really rooted in how society teaches us to judge ourselves and who we should hang out with as peers. If you're genuine in your life and live towards your well-defined goals, you are pretty much by definition an interesting and not boring person. A mentor acquaintance of mine, let me pop him up on the screen. Get over there. There we are. No, that's not the one I wanted. There he is. Jasprit Singh. He has a website, theminoritymindset.com, and he has another one now. He has the Morning Brief, I think it is. Oh, I should have had that. Jasprit, I'm sorry. I did have it, and then I lost it. I'll look at it and put it in the notes. But I met him at one of the FinCons I went to, financial conference, and it was just fascinating. I try to sit near the front in those things. I never understand when somebody pays a bunch of money to go to a conference, a bunch of money for a hotel, goes through all that, invests all that time, all that effort, and then sits in the back row and can't hear anything. Like, if I can't sit in the front row, I'm sitting in the second row. And that's usually where I was. And in this case, I was just off to the side in front of the podium in the second row. And it was like the whole time, he's like 30 feet away and he's talking to me. Awesome speaker, really great. And it turns out, I had written this before, I forgot. I almost quoted it exactly, but I'll read the quote right now on the screen. The minority mindset has nothing to do with the way you look. It's the mindset of thinking differently than the majority of people. And that's really it. And marketbriefs.com actually is his newsletter. I should put that up. And I meant to put this one on the screen. There we go. Minority Mindset is the site we're looking at right now. And the other one is marketbriefs, marketbriefs.com. And again, this is the best feature of StreamYard, and we'll switch to this one, marketbriefs.com. If you get a chance, check them both out. Check out Jasprit. He's awesome. And he's not awesome because he's different. He's not awesome because of anything. He's awesome because he is genuinely interesting. His story is genuinely compelling. His the progress he's made since having to emigrate twice and losing everything both times is really enrapturing. And you listen to somebody like that and you say, my life actually has been extraordinarily easy and good and wonderful. And so the big thing about this, though, those things are all amazing and wonderful and relevant and great, but it's that if you follow your dreams and try and live on your own terms, you are truly in the minority of humankind. So kind of back to the boring question, if you're taking, let me go back to our other screen, by the way. Thank you, Jasprit. Or Jasprit, I guess I say it. Apologize. If you're taking an active role in planning your retirement, even if you started too late, isn't that more interesting than complaining about what you should do or, should have done or complaining that, life sucks, Complaining about yourself, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Because either if you complain about yourself, that's not really a very good way to live. And the other thing is, if you're complaining about life, that's only true if that's how you decide to frame it. We cover that a lot in previous episodes. How you frame your life, how you frame things, how you perceive life is very much how you decide to look at life. So, you can be in the minority of people and say, wow, I should have done a bunch of things 10, 20, 30 years ago, but I didn't. And here's what I'm doing now. And it's working out really well. Or it's not quite what I expected, but things are going okay. Or this is the good parts about what I did. That's interesting. To sit and complain is intrinsically boring. So back to the newspaper story. I'll bet you this person, he's a famous writer for The Simpsons, actually. Um, I can't imagine that he doesn't have interesting things happening in his life and around him quite regularly. He has all sorts of, famous and interesting people coming in and out of his life on a regular basis. If he just spoke about those and was aware of those and looked at what his goals were and talked about how these things are moving him towards his goals. And again, I'm not criticizing him in any way. Maybe he does those things and the story is just written with the intent of being entertaining. But again, like I said, I see this often in society about how you're not very boring unless you hang out with the Pepsi generation and things like that. But if you just focus, all of us just focus on the natural good things in our lives, we're not boring at all. We're actually very interesting because a lot of people want to know how to live life that way. So it starts with your own goals. If your idea of being not boring is having a bunch of new exciting adventures, then maybe you should look at your audience and what you think they need. I'm fortunate. I have a few close friends, not a ton, but a few. And some of those have been friends for over 60 years. And we find each other quite entertaining because, go figure, we have a lot in common and understand how our other friends view life as well. So we don't have to become unboring. We're friends because we enjoy each other, and that's never boring. Sometimes entertaining in unexpected ways, but never boring. So honestly, I'd say all of us are not normal or typical, but in ways that most people would probably not recognize nor appreciate unless we think about it and frame it that way in our head and present it that way. When I meet new people, am I concerned about being boring? Not in the least. And for a number of different reasons. If that new acquaintance finds me boring, then honestly, they probably should just stay a casual acquaintance because it probably means that we don't really share much in common, and that's fine. But the other reason, and I guess this is what really caught my interest in the article, was that most of what he wanted to do or did was simply to impress someone else. Imagine if instead, like I said, if he chose things to move himself towards his life goals instead, and how much more satisfying and interesting that would be. We're all unique. We all have interesting, and we are interesting to those to whom we share genuine and worthwhile interests. We don't have to dress up for society. We just have to be ourselves and be genuine. We've talked about mindfulness, positive attitude, and being purposeful in our lives. Those qualities will always make us fascinating and worthwhile to people who share our principles in life. So that's it for tonight. Never be ashamed of your life if you genuinely feel you're living it in a way that brings you fulfillment and satisfaction. It's generally pretty safe to totally ignore all the must-haves that society claims are essential. Big new cars, fancy clothes, multiple houses, etc. They don't bring happiness. Being genuine and surrounding yourself with some of your close friends who are also genuine, that's the best and most reliable way to have interesting things to share and to enjoy. Be satisfied with all the amazing qualities you already have. Good friends don't have to be impressed with tricks. They're good friends because they're already impressed by you. Your homework, optional of course, is to think of some things in your life that your friends find interesting and that a casual acquaintance may not be interested in. Extra points if you think about how you could reframe those things so that even a new person might be at least curious about the now interesting things you're talking about. And again, it's just to go over one more time. If you go back through your day, and to talk about this 1 second, you go back through your day and you think, oh, nothing much really happened today. Go back through it slowly and say, oh, I remember I was talking, I'll give you another example. I was going down to Virginia, stopped at just the Delaware Welcome Center, one of my regular stops. It's about halfway down. And sweet young lady worked behind the counter, and I grabbed a banana and went up to the counter and gave her $1, and she said, it's 2 bananas for $1. I've been there before and bought a banana, and nobody said anything. And I don't know whether they put 50 cents in the register, 50 cents, just didn't care, whatever. She was the first person, big smile on her face, This is on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. There's about a bazillion people in that place. People coming and going, getting gas, using the restroom, to buying stuff, complaining about the traffic, carrying it on. And the entire time, she had a smile, made everybody smile. Brought a little bit of happiness in everybody's life. How nice you're going to see your family. Where you from? That's awesome. Thank you. Have a good trip. Stay safe. And she's probably thinking when she says to somebody, they say, "Well, what do you do?" She goes, "Oh, I'm just a cashier in a service area on the highway." And that is so far from what she was. Every day, she makes dozens, maybe hundreds of people's lives better. So there's two sides to that whole thought. One is that many of us kind of like, well, what did I do today to help anybody? Here she's able to make dozens, hundreds of people feel better about their trip, and to empathize with them and just help them get through a day, and tell them, hey, you can get 2 bananas instead of 1 for the same price. Kind of like, oh, great. And I ate both bananas. Changed my attitude. But the other side of it is, when somebody asks us what she does, it would also be safe to say and accurate to say, I make hundreds of people's lives better every single day by just being a smiling face when they weren't expecting it. So, like I say, we're all interesting, we're all exciting. We just have to remember to find it within our own lives. So that's really it now. Please remember the war in Ukraine, everywhere else the disasters. Lord knows there's enough going around. And ukr7.com, worldcentralkitchen.org. World Central Kitchen is operating in many places. I don't know if they're in Palestine right now or not. I think it's probably still a little too active for them to be there, but I don't know that for a fact. I didn't look on their website. I should have. And then ukr7.com is where we have all the links to things specific to Ukraine. Again, remember, one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. Looking outside of yourself into the world is a good way to expand your horizons in the world. And also, like my little, travel friend there, a good way just to make somebody's day a little bit nicer by doing the smallest of things that may be insignificant for you to do, but may actually make a big difference in someone else's life. So if you can and able, check it out, ukr7.com, wck.org, and or just whatever charities or whatever around you, or just try and spread some cheer as you walk around. As always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along. If not, please hit that like button. I'm sorry. Found something useful, pass it along and hit that like button. And if not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Have a great week. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thanks.